The husband of former ISIS bride Shamima Begum has condemned the attacks on Europe carried out by the terror group, but he does believe that the organisation will build a caliphate. So Dutch national Jago Regic, 29 years old, has admitted to being an ISIS fighter and married British-born Shamima when she was just 15 years old in 2015. He said the attacks on Europe were not Islamically responsible because innocent women and children were killed. So, it's nice to see where his lines are. However, he refused to comment on whether he condoned other aspects of their use of violence, such as beheadings, stonings, and the use of women as sex slaves.
Yes, despite being held at a detention camp in Syria, he wants to return home to the Netherlands, where he would face a prison sentence. While joining us now live from Salisbury is Chip Chapman, who is a former head of counter-terrorism at the Ministry of Defence. Thank you for joining us this morning. What do you make of these comments, and why do you think it is that Shamima Begum and others like to occasionally, stick their head above the parapet and give us some analysis of ISIS?
Well, firstly, it adds to the dread hazard. We all hear about these things, and therefore we think that terrorism is larger than it is, particularly in Europe. That leads us to a position of threat inflation, particularly in Europe again, as I said, because if you look at the reality of the statistics in Europe, and I'm taking here the Europol statistics, there were 21 people killed in 10 terrorist attacks in the year to June 21. That is a different thing than saying there are largely large attacks in, for example, the Middle East, Syria and Iraq, and East and West Africa, where the wilayats or provinces of IS are still active. But let's not overblow that too. They are maybe a few thousand, and the chances of them governing again are probably in the range of 0 to 5%, which in intelligence terms is a remote chance.
This is just inflating the issue. But do you think when Shamima Begum's husband and Shamima, they go public with these sorts of things, that it's just their attempt to actually win over the favour of some of the people back in the West, because they ultimately do want to return back to the West?
It's partly that, and partly different audiences of those who still want to go and fight in the Middle East or maybe in Afghanistan. And that is because what we often see now is that jihadists are going local. That is, they are potentially abandoning some of the global aspects that Al-Qaeda underpinned, with this view that, for example, America and the West were the far enemy who needed to be defeated before you took on the near enemy, the regimes that they didn't like in the Middle East. So, for example, they're underpinned by what we call the single narrative, that is, removal of Western influence in the Middle East, removal of what they see as apostate regimes from the Middle East, and then thirdly, the re-establishment of the caliphate. You've got to understand what the caliphate is in their terms. The caliphate, from their perspective, was the caliphate of the prophetic order. That is what they call the Salaf. Salaf, that's the pious predecessors, those things that underpinned how regimes operated in the first 3 generations of Islam. And it is that why they brought the methods of slavery, torture, beheading, killing of gays to their methodology. And when you bring that methodology to bear, you are rejected. So that's why the chances, again, of the caliphate being re-established in those areas are very, very small. And they always have, as they showed when they took over this territory, the jihadist governance dilemma, in the same way that the Taliban have a Taliban governance dilemma in Afghanistan. People still need to eat at the end of the day.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask you a bit about that, actually, the Afghanistan situation, really. The Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, I believe that the Taliban have called it now. Is that just a different version of a caliphate? Is that almost like their own caliphate, as it were?
Not really. There are different schools of theology in Islam, and in Afghanistan they are underpinned by the Hanafi school, a Deobandi school, whereas the caliphate people in the Middle East are underpinned by Salafists, the Wahhabist aspect, and ISK are Salafists. And the Taliban will mallet them because they are malleting Salafists. The Taliban effectively are kind of Afghan nationalists with a Deobandi hint.
Gosh. I tell you what, it almost sounds like a like something nice, or like Afghan nationalist with a Diabanti hint. It sounds like something that you'd say when you have a nice sip of a full-bodied red wine or something like that. But obviously, it's something completely different. Thank you very much, Chip, for coming on board the show today. Chip Chapman, who's the former head of counter-terrorism at the Ministry of Defence.